If you're the type of character who thinks armor is fashionable and shields are optional, then the champion's probably the right class for you. Whew. Showing you how to level that thing up to level 2 and be an absolute juggernaut. If you are a barbarian and you've seen our previous level up guide, this is going to be a little bit more of the same. But today we're going to be tier listing all of your options as a champion in DC20. So first things first, let's explain what we're doing. There are things like general talents, multi-class talents, and class talents. I'll bring those up whenever those do come up, but for the most part, we're just going to be talking about multi-class talents today. And the best multi-class talent for the champion, in my opinion, is going to be the Barbarian. But with only 1 AP and 1 SP to activate Rage, giving you extra damage, advantage on might saves, and you gain resistance half to elemental and physical damage, what more could you want? You're essentially a walking tank at that point, and trying to build on that just gets a little bit better. And you might notice that Rage has nothing to do with being unarmored like the Berserker trait, which I necessarily wouldn't recommend for a champion, because champions usually use heavy mail armor, or maybe even a shield or 2. Yes, I said 2. You can do that in DC20. If we're looking at a champion, though, from the aspect of being a weapon fighter or someone who honors the blade, then the bound weapon is going to be perfect for you. I've said it before, the Thor's hammer analogy, but if you're somebody who lives and dies by the blade, it's absolutely perfect for things like samurais or hardened fighters like a champion might be. Not to mention you also get a smite and illuminate feature a part of that. Nobody can scoff at more damage, and it's gonna be hilarious when you hold up your sword to light the way, kind of like a torch. But let's not discount the Spellblade disciplines, because it's almost as lucrative as the Cleric's Divine Order. You can pick 2 of the features associated with Spellblade discipline, and it'll really just double down on what you're trying to do, or make you do something so much better. Like, you could pick Warrior, for instance, to gain some maneuvers, but as a champion yourself, you already probably have the benefits from that. So instead, I would probably pick something like Blink Blade or Spellbreaker. The ability to do spell duels with your weapon, or Blink Blade, the ability to teleport to adjacent places while you're fighting, becomes super beneficial for people who are able to utilize movement, which is not a lot of people. And I'm talking about players, not classes in that aspect. But for the third best choice for our champion, that's going to be Hunter. Specifically, Hunter's Mark. A much better feature than flavored terrain. This is literally just a flavor feature that amounts to almost nothing. So we're basically not going to talk about that ever again. But let's talk about Hunter's Mark, because you get advantage on awareness and survival checks to find your target. The first martial attack against your target on your turn has advantage and ignores physical damage reduction. Not to mention, if you score a heavy or critical hit, you're also going to get a D8 help die against that target if somebody else chooses to attack it as well. There are so many benefits that come with the Hunter's Mark that it's kind of OP in a way, especially if you're someone who needs to rely on getting a heavy, brutal, or critical hit. Advantage is going to almost ensure those types of things. Almost. Now, for the tier 4 slot for a champion, I'm gonna be kind of contentiously inserting the Cleric. Cleric Order is able to do so many different things. It's kind of like you could choose this and it'd be a totally bad option, or you could choose this and it'd be a totally good option, just depending on what you're building towards. But if you wanted to gain things like Death, enemy creatures within 10 spaces of you take an additional 1 damage from attacks while they're bloodied, or Grave, allied creatures within 10 spaces of you take 1 less damage from attacks while they're bloodied, kind of like being a beacon of hope in the battlefield. But you could also pick things like Ancestral, which is, I can't emphasize enough, very important, because it's one of the only ways that you can get extra ancestry points out of the normal level up slots that you would gain those ancestry points. I believe at 4 and 7, but don't quote me on that, I'm not looking at it. And for the most part, we are glossing right over the Divine Blessing, because as you can see, it takes 1 MP to cast that, and we don't have MP because we're marshals, and this thought experiment is about being a better marshal. So any of the things that rely on MP, we're just gonna gloss entirely over. But the next thing we could look at is going to be the Monk. Monk's training is not necessarily very helpful for a champion, especially since the champion usually relies on armor to mitigate damage. But the Monk's stance is pretty agnostic. You can apply it to almost any situation, and if you had, let's say, a more diverse repertoire of things to pull out in certain situations, that is helpful, but you don't want to stretch yourself too thin. And this is one of the things that can do that. So the Monk stance, getting bigger hits from the bear stance, or maybe the cobra stance or wolf stance being a hit and run type of tactic, or being able to counter when you do get hit. Those things are super helpful in the middle of battle, as long as you remember to activate that Monk stance. Now, when we talk about the 6th best option for a champion, I'm actually gonna say martial expansion. I know this is really contentious and I've thrown some shade at these general talents before, but getting 2 additional maneuvers is nice, not necessary usually for a martial, but getting an extra technique is really essential. Those could come in handy and are really powerful, especially if you have a couple of them at your disposal. And for me to be suggesting martial expansion at tier 6, you can only assume how bad the other ones could be for the next tier. So at tier 7, I'm going to be placing the Rogue and their debilitating strike. Debilitating strike is essentially just a maneuver, but you get deafened, exposed, hindered, or slowed 2, which is a little bit better than just a basic maneuver. However, all martials have most of the maneuvers anyway, so it kind of becomes irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. And when I say most maneuvers, you really have like 5 to 7 more to pick from. Not really what I'm looking for, and most of those maneuvers are going to be classified as like defensive maneuvers too, which most of the time as a martial you're not really trying to be that defensive, but they do come in handy. I would say debilitating strike is the better of the 2 because roguish finesse is gonna do kind of nothing for you. Getting a little bit more movement on the battlefield is nice, but skill mastery limit increase is essentially the better thing out of the coupling of the benefits from roguish finesse. Sure, you can gain a skill point, get a skill higher in your skill expertise, but fighters aren't usually looking to amplify their skills. That's kind of like a bard, spellcaster, utility person type of thing. So I don't place too much importance on those when I'm thinking about how to be a better martial. But when we talk about the warlock coming in at the 8th slot, we got to talk about the warlock contract, because that is a nice cycle that you're able to buy into. Getting advantage on checks with a little bit of HP as a cost is nice. Getting more HP with a little bit of AP is also nice. But this is where it actually gets a little bit better, because we can talk about packed boons, not packed weapon, not packed cantrip, but packed armor. You gain 3 defensive maneuvers of your choice, which if you are actually trying to be a defensive type of fighter or champion, then this would be the one you're looking for, because you're also going to gain MDR, mystical damage reduction, which is super hard to get, and I think this is probably the only way that you can get it at level 2. If you know a better way to get it, please leave that down in the comments below, because I would love to know. But the reason why it's so low on the list is because it focuses on defense rather than offense. And to be a better martial, I kind of correlate being an offensive type of person. But you know, if you were doubling down on defense, this probably would go a little bit higher up on the list. Which brings us to our number 9 spot, the Commander. Commander is a very niche martial class and not necessarily useful for the other martial classes. It's kind of like the Druid, how the Druid's class features aren't really useful for anyone else but themselves. And that's when it brings us to Inspiring Presence. Get a little bit more HP depending on how much SP you've spent, which is nice but not really useful until the much higher levels. And to try to build into something like that at level 2 might be a little bit strange. But there is also the Commander's Call, which gives you the ability to give somebody your attack. Using 1 AP and 1 SP, you tell that person right there, it's time to attack, do it. And then they do. But as somebody who is good at doubling down on attack, or has a good weapon, or has other features that could help with your specific attack, it might not be the best thing for you to tell somebody to attack for you. Maybe you should just attack. And coming in at our 10th spot for the tier list is going to be Attribute Increase. You gain 1 attribute point to put into any attribute of your choice. And increasing an attribute becomes, pretty beneficial. Increase might, get more health. Increase intelligence, get more skill points. things like that. And those numbers affect essentially a bunch of different numbers that you do want to increase. So just making your numbers look better is always a valid option. Below that, at our 11th spot, is going to be the Bard class, specifically Font of Inspiration. Font of Inspiration gives you ranged help actions with reactions as well. Help, for the most part, isn't going to be the best thing that you're able to do on the battlefield to be a better marshal, but it is a nice utility that you're able to expand for everyone else. So if you want to make other people a better marshal, this might be a feature that could be worth it. But it kind of falls in the commander's wheelhouse more so than a champion. But when we finally get to the 12th spot on the list, it's going to be spellcasting expansion. In all honesty, if you're trying to be a better marshal, that's probably the worst thing that you could take as a talent. But even after that, just picking skill or trade increase, I'm gonna assume is the worst possible option that you could pick as a talent, because you can gain skills or trade points in a myriad of different ways with an ample amount of benefits from other multi-class talents. I do wanna say, just in case you guys are gonna comment, there's no druid, sorcerer, or wizard features available to the champion because they use MP, as well as there's no champion class talent at level 2. I do want to make sure to reiterate that next time. That's my 2 cents about the champion, everybody. What do you guys think? Please leave that down in the comments below. Did I miss anything? But you know, it's time to sign off. So don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you all later.